Okay, I'm here this morning without my eyebrows. I just woke up and I figured today I could just start focusing on something rather than sitting in my bed and babbling about the things that pop up in my mind and disturb me in the morning sometimes. So rather than being destructive to myself or my mood, I decided to actually focus my energy on something. Minimization is actually what I'm going to discuss today. I pulled up several pages, 6 pages on the internet. The first one being from Wikipedia. It says minimization, and in parentheses it says psychology. And it means for other uses, see minimization. Minimization is a type of deception involving denial coupled with rationalization in situations where complete denial is implausible. It is the opposite of exaggeration. Minimization, downplaying the significance of an event or emotion, is a common strategy in dealing with feelings of guilt. Words associated with minimization include belittling, discounting, downplaying, euphemism, making light of, meiosis, I think that's what it says, meiosis, minification, minimize, trivializing, underplaying, and understating. Minimization may take the form of a manipulative technique, observed in abusers and manipulators to downplay their misdemeanors when confronted with irrefutable facts, observed in abusers and manipulators to downplay positive attributes like talents and skills, etc., of their victims. Typical psychological defenses exhibited by stalkers and guilty criminal suspects include denial, rationalization, minimization, and projection of blame onto the victim. A variation on minimization as a manipulative technique is claiming altruistic motives, such as saying, I don't do this because I'm selfish and for gain, but because I'm a socially aware person interested in the common good. Wow. Cognitive distortion. Minimization may also take the form of cognitive distortion that avoids acknowledging and dealing with negative emotions by reducing the importance and impact of events that give rise to those emotions, that avoids conscious confrontation with the negative impacts of one's behavior in others by reducing the perception of such impacts, that avoids interpersonal confrontation by reducing the perception of the impact of others' behavior on oneself. Again, this information is in Wikipedia under minimization, and then in parentheses it says psychology. The reason I decided to talk about this today is because none of us knows each other's limits. None of us knows each other's thresholds. And just as with pain, physical pain, we all have different thresholds. I was discussing with my daughter yesterday why spanking was unacceptable, and that it's no different from beating the living daylights out of someone to spanking. There's really no difference. I mean, and I guess one could be more traumatic than the other in a sense, but each person having a different threshold, how do you determine which one was more traumatic? You don't, because each person is different. You can punch somebody in the face, like I was punched in the face, and not leave a bruise. I was never bruised anytime that I was punched in my face. But I was bruised when I punched myself in the face, and I know damn well that me punching myself in my face when I had meltdowns was not anywhere near as hard as other people that had punched me in the face. I actually lost consciousness when I got punched by someone else. Lost consciousness, but I didn't lose consciousness when I punched myself, but I had bruises all over my face. I mean, we gauge how severe or traumatic a whipping is based on bruising and redness and things like that. It's irrelevant. It's really irrelevant because everybody's body is different, number one. When you're hitting someone else, you're not hitting yourself. Your body is only designed to determine how much pain it is in, and that level of pain is what tells you that your body should not be experiencing what it's experiencing because it's painful. That's what deters you from going through that again, or doing that again, or deters you from a certain activity. For one person to inflict pain on another person, there's no way to determine how severe that pain is and how severely traumatized the person might be receiving that pain. Just like I explained before, I broke my foot and didn't feel anything. the only way I knew was that I could not stand on my foot. It wouldn't support my weight. That's the only way I knew I broke it. And so I went inside and I sat down on a table, and they determined, okay, I need to go to the hospital. I went to the hospital. They checked my foot was broken. But when you slap or pinch or hit me on the surface, it's a much more different pain. It actually hurts. I've had other incidents where I hurt my tailbone. I went to work and it was either a tendon that I ended up going down the splits, and something in my hip it popped. You could hear it. And for 3 days I couldn't walk. But when it initially happened, I was still walking around. I had to drive home. I had to let them know, okay, this is starting to hurt too much. I can't barely move around. And so I walked through it. So our bodies are the only bodies that we have the ability of feeling and sensing the pain that we are feeling or sensing, and therefore it's not acceptable to hit or inflict pain on somebody else, because you are not them. You do not sense or feel the pain that they feel, and everybody feels things differently. Everyone has a different threshold of pain. Some women can go through labor easy peasy, it's nothing. Others can't. Others, they're screaming, oh my God, I mean, bloody murder. It's just one of the situations you can understand that and it goes the same with not just physical pain. It goes with mental pain. It goes with emotional pain. It goes with physical pain as well. Back to this cognitive distortion. It was minimization. May also take the form of cognitive distortion. That was the avoidance of that avoids acknowledging and dealing with negative emotions by reducing the importance and impact of events that give rise to these emotions. I already read this. Examples: saying that a taunt or insult was only a joke. Something Jeffrey Miller used to do all the time to my daughter, and she still does. That's one of her behaviors. Not so much anymore. She's kind of lost that behavior. A customer receiving a response to a complaint to a company for poor service, being told that complaints like this from other customers were very rare, when in fact they are common. Suggesting that there are just a few bad apples or rogues in an organization, when in reality problems are widespread and systematic. School bullying, sometimes minimized as a prank. School bullying is one form of the victimization or physical abuse which has sometimes been unofficially encouraged, ritualized, or even minimized as sort of a prank by teachers or peers. The main difference between pranks and bullying is establishment of power, inequity between the bully and the victim that lasts beyond the duration of the act. Understatements. These are all forms of minimization. Understatements. Understatements is a form of speech which contains an expression of less strength than what would be expected. Understatement is a staple of humor in English-speaking cultures, especially in British humor. In this humorous form, the understatement is expected to be interpreted literally. Related but separate is euphemism. I'm sorry. In this humorous situation, an understatement, the understatement is expected to not be interpreted literally. I read that incorrectly. Related but separate to euphemism, where a polite phrase is used in a place of a harsher or more offensive expression. Now that goes with my statements that I'm always saying, what makes a curse word a curse word? Any word can be used in an abusive manner. That's what makes it a curse word and unacceptable and inappropriate. Just saying shit, damn, fuck, ass, bitch, all of that, those are descriptive words used for description and expression, and I think by one person. And who chooses which one is acceptable and which one is not? When bitch is saying the same thing as a female dog, and when used towards a person, it's an insult. That's when it's abusive. Ass is a donkey. When used to describe a person, or when used to sexually harass a person, it's a curse word. Fuck you. That's a curse word. What the fuck? Expressing emphasized whatever. That's not a curse word. Shit. Calling someone a piece of shit is a curse word. You have a piece of shit and a piece of fecal matter, they're both exactly the same thing. One's not any different than the other. Shit, fecal matter. Poop, crap, defecation, scat, a turd. It's all the same thing. So how is shit a cuss word and the rest is not? It doesn't make sense. It's all how you use words, and any word can become a curse word. Minimization. My mother is minimizing the, and maybe it's not her intentions, but she's minimizing the impact my son's suicide has on me, saying that I have no right to say anything about my son's suicide because I was not the one that experienced it. This is even more damaging and causing more trauma for me because I don't understand. Okay, I obviously, based on my disorder, and now that I understand it, I obviously had trouble expressing to my parents, and I thought I was expressing to them the dire need for me to get away from there and expressing to them that my rights and my child's rights were being violated. I thought that I had expressed to them the situation adequately, and apparently I hadn't. They never understood that I was not a willing resident of California. They never understood I did not want to be there. Just because I was able to maneuver and navigate through life every day, the majority of the time was only when I had a partner, which was Linnea's biological father, for a short period of the time. I guess I'd say half of the time. He was in my life every day. We communicated every day. He supported me every day, and he was there for me. And that's when I was navigating life and getting things done the way I needed to. As soon as he was no longer in my life in a supportive manner, that's when I started failing to be able to navigate on my own, to being able to deal with and continue to defend myself in the matter, and it all just crumbled down around me and became even worse. And that's when I became nearly psychotic. I'm not going to say nearly psychotic. I was literally, if it wasn't anybody messing with my head, I was literally psychotic. And that's not anything that was my fault. People are minimizing that as well. Minimizing the fact that they've separated my whole family for the past 20 years almost. Almost 20 years. No, more than that. I think even 20 years. 18 to 20 years. And that includes my children before my youngest here. Moving back to wikipedia.org. Self-esteem and depression. Redefining events to downplay their significance can be an effective way of preserving one's self-esteem. One of the problems with depression, found in those with clinical bipolar and chronic depressive mood disorders, as well as cyclothymia, is the tendency to do the reverse, minimizing the positive, discounting praise, and dismissing one's own accomplishments. On the other hand, one technique used by Alfred Adler to combat neurosis was to minimize the excessive significance the neurotic attaches to his own symptoms, the narcissistic gains derived from pride in one's own illness. And when they say the narcissistic gains, they're not saying that a person is narcissistic. We all have a tendency to display some symptoms of almost every mental health disorder. If you look at it, some of them are, a lot of them have symptoms that people at one time or another display. It's when you have a consistent presentation of multiple symptoms that you have a problem, and when it becomes destructive to others and to yourself, or when it becomes disabling to others or yourself, that's when you have a disorder. That's when you have to classify it as something that needs attention. Social minimization. Display rules expressing a group's general consensus about the display of feeling often involve minimizing the amount of emotion one displays, as with a poker face. When children cry or express emotion, like last night my daughter was upset, and I told her it's okay to cry when you feel any way you feel that makes you cry. I don't tell her to stop being a crybaby. I don't tell her to suck it up. I don't tell her to stop crying. I don't tell her, don't there you go with that shit. I don't ever minimize. When she's crying for a reason. And at that point, it's my responsibility as a mother to find out why and ask her if she's okay. And that's what we did. And we resolved the situation. And I told her, it's okay to cry. Don't be embarrassed. I'm not laughing at you. I'm not upset with you. It's okay to cry. Social interchanges involving minor infringements often end with the victim minimizing the offense with a comment like, think nothing of it. Using so-called reduction words such as no big deal, only a little, merely, or just, the latter particularly useful in denying intent. On a wider scale, renaming things in a more benign or neutral form, collateral damage, for death, is a form of minimization. Literary analogs. A scene in the film Monty Python and the Holy Grail involving the Black Knight character demonstrates an absurd level of minimization. For example, the knight's response to his having his left arm severed is, "It's just a flesh wound." Compare with the Monty Python Dirty Fork sketch, which is the opposite extreme of absurdity, catastrophization. Catastrophization. Now, for a while, catastrophization is what people were telling me I was doing. A mental health professional that was very near and dear to me, my mental health rehabilitation technician teacher, my instructor, identified that one of my symptoms was catastrophization, but he wasn't informed of the whole situation. He didn't have a full understanding of what was going on in my life. And while, yes, some of the things I was getting upset were catastrophization of the situation, but that's because I was unable and unwilling to address the real issues that were making those events and situations such catastrophic events and situations in my life. It was much easier to face those and catastrophize those than it was to face the ones that were truly a catastrophe. See also abuse, deadpan, devaluation, discrediting tactic, half-truth, limited hangout, mind games, mitigating factor, psychological manipulation, relational transgressions, reverse psychology, rhetoric, spin, stiff upper lip. That was all from Wikipedia, under minimization, in parentheses, psychology. Now there is also trauma-informed care, ncbi.nlm.nih.gov. Trauma-informed care, a socioculture perspective. Many individuals who seek treatment in behavioral health settings have histories of trauma, but they don't often recognize the significant effects of trauma in their lives. And this can go both ways with the person that's traumatized, not accepting how much they've been traumatized. For instance, I know my mom and my whole family has a certain degree of trauma that they haven't yet. I can't say that they've accepted or not. For some of them, it might require treatment. For some of them, it might not, but at least needs, to a certain degree, to be acknowledged and understood by each individual person. And I'm not in a position to help any of them with any of that because I'm not necessarily anyone they communicate with on a daily basis. Anyway, either they don't draw connections between their trauma histories and their presenting problems, or they avoid the topic altogether. Likewise, treatment providers may not ask questions that elicit a client's history of trauma, may feel unprepared to address trauma-related issues proactively, or may struggle to address traumatic stress effectively within the constraints of their treatment program, the program's clinical orientation, or their agency's directives. By recognizing the traumatic experience in their sequelae tie closely into behavioral health problems, frontline professionals and community-based programs can begin to build a trauma-informed environment across the continuum of care. Key steps include meeting clients' needs in a safe, collaborative, and compassionate manner, preventing treatment practices that re-traumatize people with histories of trauma who are seeking help or receiving services, building on the strengths and resilience of clients in the context of their environment and communities, and endorsing trauma-informed principles in agencies through support, consultation, and supervising of staff. Now, when I was receiving treatment at Oasis Mental Health in Indio, they repeatedly did assessments on me, and I felt like it was all the time. They said that it was maybe once every 6 months. Every time I did an assessment, it was like me having to go through whatever events they would ask me about. And then when I did the final reassessment, they sent CPS to my parents' house and caused a whole nother dramatic, I'm not saying dramatic like drama, but traumatic. They caused a whole nother traumatic scenario by exposing my children with my mom to CPS in invading their space, invading their privacy again, simply because I expressed I had been spanked with a belt as a child. But they refused, and they didn't give any attention to the place where my youngest daughter was, where she was actively being abused, where she was actively being deprived of her mother and traumatized and abused and hurt, and we were, repeatedly reporting abuse, and they never addressed it for her. But they sent CPS because of an assessment. After re-traumatizing me every time we would take one, and sometimes I would refuse. I don't want to do this. I don't want to go through this again and again. I've already done it. Oh well, it's outdated, and then I don't care. I don't care. Nothing ever comes of any of it. They don't take any therapeutic measures. They just get your assessment, proceed to have that information in the computer, but you don't get any personalized care you get is personalized by you when it comes to Oasis. You choose which groups you go to. Your doctor might suggest a few, but they're all open to everybody, and you choose which ones you go to. And it's not like they ever sit down and actually have a counseling session with you. They sit there, ask you about your symptoms, and they prescribe you medication. The next time you come back, you sit there, they ask you how those medications are working, or if they're not working, and then if they're not, then they change you up with another one. Or they try to get you interested in the long-acting shots, or they just things like that. They never sit down and have any kind of therapeutic session with you. They never sit down and listen to anything other than how your medications are affecting you, and if you have any concerns. And it's not, to me, that's not anything that addresses anything. Like they I don't know. Anyway, and they severely, they downplay, they minimize the effect of assessments on clients. Like, seriously, every time we have to do that assessment and not have any kind of therapeutic anything about it, it's like they just bring up all those issues and then they leave them all sitting there on your table, and then they walk away. It's ridiculous. Anyhow, that resulted in them claiming they were mandated reporters. It was an intern that did my assessment. A nice woman named Megan. She's a very nice woman. I thought she was very good at what she did, but I was confused as to why she was insisting on mandate reporting. She said, well, it's not, I'm not sending anyone to CPS. I'm not sending anyone to your mom's to take the children. I'm sending them to do a welfare check because you are expressing that you were spanked with a belt. And I was like, okay, but I'm telling you, my youngest lives with a sexual predator who's been convicted of sex crimes against minors. He's not her father. He's physically, sexually, and emotionally abused me all these years. He's physically and emotionally abused her all these years, and no one will even write a CPS report about it. But they accepted his CPS report for general neglect, when I've never neglected any of my children. So that made me upset. Minimization. Let's see. Another one I have on here is... I'm trying to close that. Understanding the impact of trauma. This is from... I thought this was from SAMHSA. No. Wrong one. I think I just read that one. Yeah. Okay. This one is from SAMHSA, SAMHSA. SAMHSA is a great organization. When I went to alcohol and other drug counseling studies, SAMHSA is one of the organizations I received a lot of literature from. They provide literature on specifically how to address certain situations, certain mental health situations, and traumatic situations related to alcohol abuse and all kinds of other things. Let's see. Substance abuse and mental health services. This is samhsa.gov. Trauma and violence. SAMHSA addresses the impact of trauma on individuals, families, and communities as a behavioral health concern that requires healing and recovery process. Trauma and violence are widespread, harmful, and costly public health concerns. SAMHSA describes individual trauma as resulting from an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. Trauma has no boundaries with regard to age, gender, socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity, or sexual orientation. Trauma is a common experience for adults and children in America, in American communities, and it is especially common in the lives of people with mental and substance use disorders. For this reason, the need to address trauma is increasingly seen as an important part of effective behavioral health care and an integral part of the healing and recovery process. Now, this is why I took alcohol and other drug counseling studies, and I received my MHRT so that I was qualified to work in a dual diagnosis clinic. Now I've discovered that I think this line of work would be far too stressful for me at this point, and I would reach burnout far too quickly just because of my own my own traumas and my own and you always risk transference and countertransference, and these are all terms counselors would understand. But continuing on, the effects of traumatic events place a heavy burden on individuals, families, and communities. Although many people who experience a traumatic event will go on with their lives without lasting negative effects, others will have difficulties and experience traumatic stress reactions. How someone responds to a traumatic experience is personal. If there is a strong support system in place, little or no prior traumatic experiences, and if the individual has many resilient qualities, it may not affect his or her mental health. Research has shown that traumatic experiences are associated with both behavioral health and chronic physical health conditions, especially those traumatic events that occur during childhood. Substance use, smoking, excessive alcohol use, and taking drugs, mental health conditions, depression, anxiety, or PTSD, and other risky behaviors, such as self-injury and risky sexual encounters, have been linked with traumatic experiences. Because these behavioral health concerns can present challenges in relationships, careers, and other aspects of life, it is important to understand the nature and impact of trauma and to explore healing. So when you begin to minimize other people's suffering and their need for healing, and you start to classify them as mentally or severely mentally ill, and you blow them off to the system tends to either institutionalize them or over-medicate them. They don't receive treatment. They lose that familial support because their family thinks they're severely mentally ill, and therefore they should be institutionalized or admitted to a loony bin, an insane asylum. I think insane asylums should be solely used for those psychopaths and sociopaths that are extremely destructive and dangerous to other people. I think other people with mental health disorders should be taken care of by their family, because when they aren't, just like with elderly people in geriatrics, is it geriatrics? Old folks' homes, people being cared for in assisted living. There are some good, don't get me wrong, there are some great assisted livings out there. And even for mental health people, mentally ill or mentally unhealthy people, and for elderly people, there are some great ones. But you have to be careful, because there are a lot of neglectful people out there only in it for the gain that they get monetarily speaking, and not actually to help people. And I believe county organizations such as Oasis Mental Health, there are a few good people in there actually doing their job. There are a few good people in there actually attending to the clients, but the majority of the people are in there just doing what they're told, and those are usually the higher ups, the ones that control what programs are offered, or control what beneficial opportunities, beneficial meaning healing opportunities that will actually aid the client in progressing and healing and gaining functionality, rather than just providing an interaction with the facility so that the facility can be paid for that interaction. It's I guess you would have to, I've never worked in a county facility. I've only done my externship. I did my externship in one place that was private, had private clients, and they had county, and they were adults, and then another place that had, and they weren't mental health, it was only substance abuse. And another facility that was very attentive to children, which I really appreciated. They were school-age children that were having difficulties, and that too was also geared towards substance abuse. But I didn't necessarily get to. I hadn't been trained as an MHRT yet, and I hadn't experienced any working in a county facility or a mental health facility or dual diagnosis facility. But that being said, I have been a client. I have been a client in a county mental health setting. And although there are beneficial opportunities, there are opportunities to become more functional and to heal, but those opportunities seem to be isolated to the people that are able to identify them, isolated to the people that are willing and able to participate on their own. Now, there are some clients that they're either over medicated or they just don't understand or grasp the concept of how these things could help them, and they don't have anyone supportive enough to get them there, or supportive enough to encourage them to go or take advantage of certain to take advantage of certain opportunities when it comes to the groups and the meetings that they offer. But what can you say? Alternatives to seclusion and restraint. Seclusion and restraint were once perceived as therapeutic practices in the treatment of people with mental and/or substance use disorders. I greatly disagree with that. I know myself. I have issues with restraint when it comes to certain people, certain situations, and certain things, because that practice has been greatly abused with me. Greatly. Like, it upsets me right now that I'm thinking about some of the times I've been restrained, I've been isolated, strapped into a chair, and for doing nothing. And it was ridiculous. Anyways, seclusion is defined as the involuntary. Today, these methods are viewed as traumatizing practices and are only to be used as a last resort when less restrictive measures have failed and safety is at severe risk. Seclusion is defined as the involuntary solitary confinement of an individual. Restraint refers to any method, physical or mechanical device or material or equipment that immobilizes or reduces an individual's ability to freely move his or her arms, legs, body, or head. A drug or medication also might be used to restrict behavior or freedom of movement. Studies have shown that the use of seclusion and restraint can result in psychological harm, physical injuries, and death to both the people subjected to and the staff applying these techniques. Injury rates to staff in mental health settings that use seclusion and restraint have been found to be higher than injuries sustained by workers in high-risk industries. Restraints can be harmful and often re-traumatizing for people, especially those who have trauma histories. Beyond the physical risks of injury and death, it has been found that people who experience seclusion and restraint remain in care longer and are more likely to be remitted for care. SAMHSA is committed to reducing and ultimately eliminating the use of seclusion and restraint practices in organizations and systems serving people with mental or substance use disorders. SAMHSA's goal is to create coercion and violence-free treatment environments. This is who I need to contact. I didn't even think about contacting SAMHSA because when the last mental health visit I had, I stood at the counter and repeatedly requested policies and procedures because I knew that they had no right by law to hold me there. I was a completely rational being. I had not been suicidal. They were claiming I was suicidal. She made up a lie saying the officer saw you with pills in your hands. He asked if you were going to take them and you said yes. I was so angry because it wasn't even if you're going to make up a lie that I was suicidal, at least make the statement believable, because nothing in that statement was suicidal. If I have a prescription and I have pills in my hands and the officer asks me if I'm going to take it, and I say yes, that is not a suicidal statement, first of all. Second of all, the pills were not in my hand. They were on my floor because I had knocked them off my table right before I laid down in bed to go to sleep. So someone who's displaying, someone who's actually lying down, trying to go to sleep, is not someone who's actively suicidal. I hadn't said to anyone that I was suicidal. I had taken a picture of my pictures of my children next to my pills and next to something else, and I had said that this is what Jeffrey Martin Miller has left me with. Pictures of my kids, because my kids were out of my life. Psychological issues or mental health issues indicated by the pills. There wasn't even enough there to hurt me had I decided I wanted to take them. And someone misinterpreted what I was saying on Instagram as a suicidal threat. And my aunt had texted me, and I told her, I said, if you guys want to save somebody, if you want to save me, save my daughter. I wasn't saying that I was a threat to myself. I was just saying everyone's so concerned about me killing myself, and everyone's so concerned about me being this and me being that. me being mentally unhealthy, but no one's looking at the big situation here. My child is with a sexual predator that abused the both of us and is still abusing the both of us. That is the problem. And no one would listen to me. No one would listen to me. But they were constantly making efforts to make sure I didn't kill myself, constantly making efforts to make sure I was put up and locked up for 3 days so they could assess me and make sure I was okay. I know what the problem is. I knew what the problem was. And everybody was minimizing that, ignoring it, and treating mental health disorders when I had not any need for mental health treatment. I needed a supportive family, I needed to be removed from the abusive situation, and I needed my child to be returned to my custody so I knew she was safe. That is what was traumatizing me. That is what was causing my psychosis. But no one would listen. Okay, SAMHSA's who I need to get a hold of. All right, so more from SAMHSA. That was from SAMHSA on trauma-based care, I think that was. Okay, SAMHSA, HRSA, Center for Integrated Health Solutions, trauma. This is just trauma in general from SAMHSA, SAMHSA. Integration.samhsa.gov. Individual trauma results from an event, series of events, or a set of circumstances experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, with lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning, mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. In the United States, 61% of men and 51% of women report exposure to at least one lifetime traumatic event. And 90% of clients in public behavioral health care settings have experienced trauma. If trauma goes unaddressed, people with mental illness and addictions will have poor physical health outcomes and ignore trauma. Hold on. People with mental illnesses and addictions will have poor physical health outcomes, and ignoring trauma can hinder recovery. I said ignore instead of ignoring. And ignoring trauma can hinder recovery. To ensure the best possible health outcomes, all care in all health settings must address trauma in a safe and sensitive way. Being mindful of and not minimizing others' suffering. You can't determine. PTSD is a difficult diagnosis, and if I'm not mistaken, bipolar and PTSD are the reasons I was approved, are the reasons I qualify for my benefits. PTSD is very unpredictable, and I believe I have CPTSD, not PTSD. I had PTSD originally, and I don't know that the PTSD goes away because that's for one traumatic event, which has actually now become 2 traumatic events, whether my mother believes that to be or not. And actually 3, because there was the suicide of my father, there was the death of my infant, and then there was the suicide of my son. Also the death of my grandfather. My understanding is that my grandfather also commits suicide, but I'm not sure. I haven't been able to talk to anybody. I think I should ask my aunt or my uncle. My understanding is that my father, my biological father who killed himself, that right after my grandfather killed himself. I don't know how true that is, or if it was just something else. I should find out though. But that's a lot of death for someone to experience from the age. Now, natural death is one thing, but for someone as influential, someone as what's the word? Like my grandfather and my father were in my immediate, like my grandfather, not in my immediate family, but they were very active parts of my life. They were very active parts of my life that most people don't lose until later on in life of natural causes. Once you're mature enough to like deal with that kind of thing is usually when people naturally lose those authority figures or those influences. And so when they're removed through trauma, like an accident or suicide or cancer or any other unexpected tragedy like that, then it does a lot to your brain. That being said, also as an adult, I lost one of my children. I actually found her dead. So that event in itself is when oh, excuse me. How embarrassing. I'm going to have to cut that out. That event in itself is when I, myself, I spiraled downwards because I lost all my support. I lost my children's father, who was the main support in my life. My family was not as supportive as I thought they were. They appeared to be supportive. They appeared to be supportive by coming down and helping me go through all my child's belongings and helping me make sure that I was moved. I think I moved in. No, I stayed where I was. Okay, well, needless to say, they came down to be supportive, helped me get the services I needed for her memorial and for her cremation and all these other things. And they appeared to be supportive. But at the same time, there were a lot of events that re-traumatized me. And I can't say if they traumatized the other person involved, but there were some things that were said that were just downright insensitive. Like, okay, my baby's father, not knowing how to deal with something like that, being uncomfortable with, and I understand his position. I understand why he said the thing that he said. He said it's okay. We're working on another one. Someone, I think my parents, told us both sorry for what you've gone through. Sorry for your loss. Yada 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 yada. And he said, oh, it's okay. We're working on another one. That wasn't him being insensitive to the fact that my daughter died. That was minimization, yes, but that was minimization for himself, not for them. He was not comfortable with the death of my child. I was not comfortable with the death of my child. I think to a certain degree we both blamed ourselves. And I don't mean he meant any harm in any way when he made that statement, but my mother made a big deal about that. Like she brought it up later. And I was like, are you kidding me? You can't understand that was the only way he understood to ease the stress or to like he could feel the pressure there. Like he could feel the tension, and it was very uncomfortable for him. And albeit it wasn't the best way to handle it, and it wasn't necessarily an acceptable statement, it wasn't anything he needed to be criticized for, because he just as well as the rest of my family and myself are not anyone that we aren't anyone that's well versed in being functional and coping well. Like, our families have histories of not being able to cope appropriately, and that was just one of the mechanisms that happened and that he used and that was like used against him. I don't know if he even knows that, but I think I refrained from even telling him that my mom was upset about that. I was like, that's not what he meant, Mom. It wasn't him saying that she was replaceable. It wasn't him saying that her death was irrelevant. It was just his way of minimizing the pain he was feeling for himself and the responsibility and guilt he was holding within himself. Like, I understood that. But I guess that's because that was our loss, and he and I were both in the same position. Even though she wasn't his biological child, he was there for everything. Completely different situation than with Jeff Miller. This was the father of my other child, my oldest child, and I was there during my whole pregnancy. There was some psychological and some physical abuse with him, but generally he was a very loving, very caring father and person. And when he drank is when he became abusive, and that wasn't very often. Now that's minimizing the trauma right there, but a completely different situation than with Jeffrey Martin Miller. Like, with Jeffrey Martin Miller, it was more forced than people realize. It was more involuntarily than people understand. Like, I wanted nothing to do with that man. He disgusted me. I despised him. He really did not even give me a choice. And a lot of people not understanding my defense mechanism sometimes when I feel too threatened and when I feel too much in danger of being abused or attacked, whether it be psychologically or physically, I will not argue. I will submit. I've been sexually assaulted on more than one occasion because I knew fighting would put my life in danger. Like, I knew that physically fighting back or verbally saying anything was going to put my life in danger, and that carries over with other experiences, and people don't realize that. If you start to become fearful in situations, I mean, it's not uncommon for women that are very submissive to be women that have experienced being punished or terrorized or tortured because they did speak up or they did attempt to defend themselves. And that's when it becomes very dangerous for us if the people around us are not being supportive or aware or understanding or accepting that we're in a very dangerous situation. And then we start to blame ourselves because we know we didn't stand up, we didn't say a lot of the things we could have said, albeit we might say something. I attempted to get away from Jeffrey Martin Miller. It took me 2 times to get away from him before I had my baby. And then when I came back and was exposed to him again, and there it was, everything starting all over again. People that know me now, I don't hang out with anybody unless I know I'm safe and comfortable with them. I don't actively pursue friendships. I don't actively go out and meet people. I isolate myself. I feel threatened by a lot of people. I love people. And it's not that I feel threatened like, oh my God, I'm in fear of everyone. It's that in the back of my mind, I'm constantly considering what's going to happen later and what could happen later, what I know will happen and what might happen. And sometimes they're disabling factors that won't allow me to make any new friends, that won't allow me to interact with new people, even if they do seem safe at first. And a lot of people don't understand that. So the last thing I want to look at is childhood trauma and minimization. Sorry, it's been 45 minutes now, and we should be done pretty soon. This is from ncbi.n. Is that an L? I think it's an NLM. ncbi.nlm.nih.gov. Childhood trauma and minimization or denial in people with and without a severe mental disorder. This is by Chelsea Church, Ola A. Andreessen, Steiner Lorentzen, Ingrid Mel, and Monica Oss. Okay, this is an article published online in 2017, Background trauma abstract. I'm just going to read the abstract because I think it's pretty long. Yeah, you could probably go through and read most of it yourself, but I'll leave a link to this one. As a matter of fact, I will leave a link to this one because it does have the full article and has a lot of information. Background. Childhood trauma has garnered extensive research concerning its role in the psychopathology of mental disorders, including psychosis. The Childhood Trauma Questionnaire utilizes a minimization denial scale to denote potential underreporters of trauma. Yet MD scores are infrequently reported, and validations of the scale are lacking in the literature. Study aim is to elucidate differences in MD between patients with severe mental disorders, and they're saying minimization denial. That's what MD is. And secondly, investigate if minimization or denial influences reports of childhood trauma between the groups. Methods. We include 621 patients with a DSM schizophrenia spectrum, bipolar spectrum diagnosis, or major depressive disorder with psychotic features, and 299 healthy controls as part of the Normant study in Oslo, Norway. History of childhood trauma was obtained using the QTC, which is a clinical diagnosis were assessed using the structured clinical interview for DSM disorders. The results. A significantly greater proportion of healthy controls, 42.8%, had a positive minimization or denial score compared to patients' 26.7%. A significantly greater proportion of healthy controls had a positive MD score compared to patients. When controlling for minimization or denial, the patient group still exhibited elevated reports of childhood trauma compared to controls, concordant with reports of childhood trauma being more frequently reported in a population of severe mental disorders. Obviously, I mean, that's going to be a given, seeing as they're seeking treatment and it's something that you're attentive to. Now, when it comes to a healthy control group, I'm not so sure that their control groups are anything. I don't know how they do their research or their clinical studies, but you have to consider where their healthy controls are coming from. Are there healthy controls anyone that, because some healthy people don't Most healthy people don't go in for an assessment and have a mental health checkup just to maintain their mental health. So it's not anything they're exposed to or anything that's even considered. So I don't know, that's confusing to me. But anyways, childhood trauma, psychopathology, minimization, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, those are keywords. The conclusion, elevated MD in the healthy control group could suggest an enhanced self-serving bias, potentially attenuated in the psychiatrics group. Clinicians and researchers would benefit from including the MD component of CTQ when assessing retrospective information on childhood trauma to rule out potential effect of minimization and denial. If you go through and read the whole article, you'll get a much better understanding of it. And when I'm reading it, sometimes I don't always read in a way that most people read. Like my sentence structure is the same, but my ability to read that sentence structure without falling victim to my own speech patterns. Sometimes I have to reread them like a billion times because I read out of sync or out of, I don't know. And sometimes I do mash things up or leave things out and don't realize it. So go through and read that yourself. That's ncbi.nlm.nih.gov. And that's the article called Childhood Trauma and Minimization / Denial in People with and Without a Severe Mental Disorder. I'll leave a link for this one below so you can read the whole article. But it's already been 50 minutes and 57 seconds, so I may as well get this show on the road. Get out of here. I got to get my kid ready for school. Thank you for watching. I just wanted to bring this up because there is a lot of minimization going on within my familial realms. Not so much by myself anymore. I try not to minimize any of my struggles and say, okay, well, this doesn't have anything to do with that, and blah, 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 and I'm just overreacting. I try not to do that anymore because I was definitely abused to the point where I was someone who minimized my own traumas because I was making excuses for the people I cared about and I thought were in my life for the right reasons, but they weren't. And by minimizing that, I was, by minimizing a lot of the things that were being done to me or the things that were being said to me or the things I was going through, I was actually exposing myself to more opportunity to be abused and exploited. So that being said, only the person going through the struggle is qualified to say whether it was traumatic or not. I know that's hard for people to swallow and hard for people to accept when it comes to terms of diagnosis. And my stepfather thinks everybody thinks they have PTSD now. I don't think he has a full understanding. I think he if he were sat down and educated on the matter and given an understanding, I think he would probably change his mind about that. And if we actually look at the things that can cause trauma, some people have irrational fears and phobias that someone slamming a door in their face could traumatize them for the rest of their life and they never leave again just because it's a door there. Who are we to say that's not a true reaction? Who are we to say that that's not a trauma to them? Like, seriously. Something that simple can traumatize one person, but for another, you're just like, well, it's so silly. You can't minimize that because obviously it's something that's impeding their ability to even be functional, like locked inside forever because someone slammed a door in your face. It sounds irrational, but it happens. It really happens that way sometimes. That being said, be sensitive to the struggles of your family and be supportive. Even if you aren't able to grasp any rational understanding, even if you're not able to grasp a rational understanding of what someone's struggles might be, it still doesn't give you the right to minimize it. Like, allow people to feel what they feel about certain things. Even if it is overly dramatic to you, don't minimize that. Like, let them feel it. That's why we're either under-expressive or we're overly expressive. Like, there's never a happy, healthy medium anymore, and that's because we're repeatedly traumatizing each other. Like, seriously. Everyone's presenting with PTSD now because everyone's being traumatized. We're ignoring years and years of research. Like, and I'm a faithful 100% supporter of no use of physical or painful, emotionally or physically painful punishment or punishment that humiliates children. I don't agree with it at all. I will stand up for that till the day I die. And 20 years of research by doctors and pediatricians is out there supporting that it is not ever acceptable. It is not ever beneficial to spank your children. The only benefit found ever is immediate compliance. That's it. Now, if you weigh that with the consequences, the possible consequences of corporal punishment or physical punishment, they don't weigh out. One, immediate compliance with lifetime of mental health disorder, childhood violence, abuse and violence as an adult, accepting abuse and violence as an adult, it's so many. Higher chances of drug use and alcohol abuse, so many risks. So many risks. Why do we still do it? Why is it still even legal in some states? If it's not legal to hit another adult who's emotionally capable of understanding why you're hitting them, for the most part, and if it's unfair, if they're not allowed to, they have the right to press charges. Children who can't protect themselves, who generally aren't running around pressing charges for being hit, aren't protected by the adults that are supposed to be protecting them. Instead, they're being hit by the adults that are supposed to be protecting them. And if you can't walk down the street and slap someone else on the ass without getting charged with sexual harassment or assault or sexual battery, or without being charged for assault in general, then how are you allowed to do it to a child? Someone who's defenseless and smaller than you. And we have to remember, we can't gauge always how hard we're hitting someone. I don't care who says they can. Oh, if you hit with your hand. That's bullshit. That's bullshit, because if you hit with an object, if you hit with a book, it's a flimsy-ass book, it's going to absorb some of the shock. Whereas your hand has bones and muscles that actually cause an impact with much more pressure than the book that's going to be flimsy. You can't, all their rules and guidelines as to what's acceptable when spanking, it's bullshit. It's bullshit, because it's never consistent. Science backs me up on that. It will never be consistent. Whether you're hitting with your hand or an object, unacceptable. Unacceptable. It's abusive. It's a psychotic disorder to me. Anyone that can't understand that, to me, you have some sort of mental disorder, because you are unable and incapable of understanding that. Like, seriously. All the facts are there, and all you have to do is read one simple article. And I'll pull that article up one day. I think I did do one video on this already, but corporal punishment, physical punishment, anything that's humiliating to children it defeats its purpose, and it destroys the trust in the familial or the parental relationship. It's outrageous. It's outrageous. My children actually support spanking, and I'm appalled by that. I'm not appalled by them. I'm appalled that they don't understand, and that's not their fault. Maybe it's my fault for not educating them, but I'm not really in a position where they would listen to me at this point, I don't think. But and they're getting to the age where they're having children of their own, and I really hope that either I'm able to help them gain that knowledge, or they're able to gain that knowledge on their own. But it's unacceptable. It's very destructive. And although a lot of people grow up saying, "Oh, I was spanked, and look at me," look at the big picture, and 9 times out of 10, exactly, look at you. You were spanked, and look at you. 9 times out of 10, these people think they're functional, and then they treat people with respect and dignity, and they're not abusive or abused, and 9 times out of 10, that's not the case. So that being said, thank you for watching. This actually worked. It made my morning much better than me ranting and raving about things. And yes, thank you for the opportunity. I hope you enjoyed my video. Sorry it was so long. I hope you can utilize these resources. And that's it. Like, share, subscribe, comment, and have a lovely day. Be gentle on each other. Don't forget that. Gentle and understanding. We need understanding, gentle people in this world. And for God's sake, please stop spanking your children. Please.